Hello, my name is Hugo Marques de Souza and this is Connected, the podcast of Nova Economics Club. Today, we left our beautiful campus in Carcavelos to be here in Lisbon in the cabinet of the Secretary of State for the Infrastructures, Frederico Francisco, and we are going to talk about the plan for the railway, the national plan for the railway. He holds a PhD in physics and has been conducting research in the railroad infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. And we are now going to examine the plan that the government built for the next years. And so, Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for inviting me.
It is a pleasure to be here. Mm-hmm. And I will start by asking about the environmental sustainability of the plan itself. Mm-hmm. And I would like to ask you that for it to be environmental sustainable, we have to attract customers mm-hmm. to switch from, mm-hmm. for example, using the airplane for going from Lisbon to Porto or from Lisbon to Faro, mm-hmm. and also to stop using private vehicles. And how can we, and the plan focuses a lot on new investments to reduce the time of the trips that you do between cities by train. Mm-hmm. And my question is, do you think that just by reducing the time of those trips, we can guarantee that the users of the clients stop using airplanes and start using the train?
Well, when you say just by reducing the time, you make it seem like it's easy to reduce the travel times in railways. It's usually quite expensive, and in most cases, it requires the construction of new lines. So, what the data shows us from experiences in other countries is that travel time, especially when railways are competing with air travel. Travel time is really the key factor in the choice, in the modal choice between rail or train or plane. It's also an important factor in the choice between road and rail, but it's especially important in the choice between air and rail travel. And what the data shows us is that usually, if the travel time by train is significantly under 3 hours or under 2.5 hours or 3 hours, mm-hmm. The train will dominate the market.
Okay.
So with this, we would expect that, for example, between Lisbon and Porto, we already have a travel time under 3 hours. So the train would have all the conditions to absorb a much larger share of the market than it is absorbing right now. Okay. But then there is another important factor here, which is capacity. The main reason that we are not carrying more passengers by train between Lisbon and Porto right now is not only time, but also an issue of capacity. Okay. Not only of the rolling stock that we have available, but also the infrastructure itself. The line, the Norte line is highly congested, and it cannot hold more trains, and especially cannot hold more trains in the times of the day that people want to travel. Okay. So it's both an issue of time. And when you combine time with capacity, the requirement for time and the requirement for capacity, you get to a solution where you need to build a new line. And this is why we definitely need to build a new line between mm-hmm. Lisbon and Porto. Okay. Not only to bring travel time down to a little over 1 hour, 1 hour and 15 minutes, 1 hour mm-hmm. and 20, but also to vastly increase the capacity of the axis itself.
Okay. Yes, because for our listeners that do not know this, basically the plan aims at reducing the time, for example, from Lisbon to Porto to 1 hour and 20 minutes. Yeah. But regarding affordability of the trips, do you think it's not a factor also that it is taken into account by the...
It is of course an important issue, but I don't think it's hard for rail operators to offer affordable tickets to passengers. Mm-hmm. even today, the tickets on the high speed service, the Alpha service that CP has, they are fairly affordable, and they have campaigns. If you buy early, you have significant discounts, so you can get a ticket from Lisbon to Porto for like 19 euros or 15 euros if you buy early. With the high speed train, with the shorter travel time, you are able to have a higher utilization of your assets. So it is not unlikely that the cost per seat offered is actually lower than it is today. So it won't be difficult for operators to offer affordable tickets. Then it's a matter of commercial policy. For example, in Spain, the national rail operator, Renfe, they always practice a higher price policy, smaller volume and higher price.
Okay.
This is why they now have competition in some of the axes. But if you go to France, for example, or to Germany, you have fairly affordable or sometimes very affordable tickets on the trains. And people who have traveled through Europe, they have that experience. I once bought a ticket from Bordeaux to Paris. Then I didn't get to use it because it was right before COVID, but I bought the ticket for like 20 euros. I once bought a ticket in between Amsterdam and Paris for like 60 euros, which is not very cheap, but since it was on a weekend, I traveled in first class for the same price as second class. So it's there are a lot of experiences in Europe that show us that it can be, and it probably will be, affordable.
Okay. And you also mentioned in the plan that it is sometimes not the most, the railway is not the most environmental friendly, because it says that for every railway kilometer built implies an emission of 1,000 to 2,000 equivalent tons of CO2. So do you think that we are going to the new customers we are going to attract is going to compensate this environmental damage?
Well, what that shows is really that people sometimes assume that trains have zero environmental impact. So there's no such thing as zero environmental impact. So if you want to travel with zero environmental impact, you need to stay home. There's no other possibility. And specifically, when you need to build new lines, it has a very high cost in CO2 because of all the land movement, all the materials, all the machines that need to work on the construction. Then, once the line starts operating, the passengers that come from air travel or come from road travel to the railway, they will start offsetting those emissions. But the higher the volume you have, the more quickly you will offset the emissions of constructing the line. So what that goes to show is that you really need to have volume on the railway in order to offset the environmental costs of building it. Of course, we need to remember that building a rail line still has a smaller environmental cost than building a new road. If you're in an axis where you need more capacity, it's environmentally cheaper, if you will, to build it, to increase that capacity in the railways than to increase it in the road. But if you have smaller volume, then the math gets a little harder.
But it's much more expensive to build a railroad.
It is somewhat more expensive. Yes.
But not that much as sometimes.
Well, it depends. It depends. When you're comparing a motorway with a high-speed line, it can be twice or three times more expensive to build a rail line because of tunnels, because of viaducts, etc. It's much more demanding in terms of alignment, in terms of geometry. But then again, it has a much smaller land footprint than a motorway has.
Okay. And now, you in the plan you also mentioned the aim of connecting the whole Atlantic coast with the railway. What is the impact you expect from this? Can we, for example, expect to have for example, people living in Porto but working in Lisbon with this?
There are two key facts to acknowledge in that matter. The first is that 80% of the Portuguese population lives along the coast between Setúbal and Braga. So we have about 8 million people living on that strip of territory. And the second is, if we have the goal to simply eliminate domestic flights in the Portuguese mainland, then we need to connect Porto and Faro with a travel time that is competitive with air travel.
Okay.
So for the second one, Porto and Faro need to be connected in around 3 hours, more or less. And then taking into account the 8 million people living along the central and north coast of Portugal, if you have that whole territory between Setúbal and Braga within 2 hours, between 2 hours or less of each other, then it will be plausible to have people living in one city and working on another, or people working in Lisbon but easily traveling regularly to Porto or something like that. So I wouldn't say there will be a lot of people living in Porto and working in Lisbon, but probably people living in Leiria and working in Lisbon, or living in Coimbra and working in Porto and making the daily commute. That I would say is more plausible.
Okay.
Because then you have the cost of traveling every day, but then it could be offset by the cost of home, or the cost of renting or buying a home in a place where real estate is cheaper.
Okay. Yeah, it depends on the costs also of the real estate. And regarding because we are talking a lot about Lisbon-Porto connection, but the Trans-European Transport Networks policy also specifies the need for a connection between Lisbon and Madrid. Do you think that the plan focuses too much on the connection between Lisbon-Porto and not as much as it should between the connection of Lisbon and Madrid?
Well, they are both in the plan.
True.
But it is true that it spends a lot more time on the Lisbon-Porto connection than on the international connections. And there is good reason for it, and it's a reason of volume. So the demand studies that we have show us that the difference between the demand for travel in the Lisbon-Porto axis and any of our cross-border axis is a factor of 10. So we have around between 1 and 1.5 million passengers a year between Lisbon and Madrid.
Okay.
And the demand forecasts for the high-speed line between Lisbon and Porto point towards 12 to 15 million passengers a year.
Okay.
So it's really a factor of 10. So of course, we still have a significant number of flights between Lisbon and Madrid and Porto and Madrid that need to be brought to the railways, and that are within a distance that is possible to shift them to the railways. But in terms of volume, it's very clear that the Lisbon to Porto is the priority, is the most important, and is really the backbone of our network. Because in addition to about 1.5 million air passengers that we have between Lisbon and Porto, you have over 100 million road trips between Lisbon in the motorway between Lisbon and Porto every year. So it's really a huge number of users that are available to be brought to the train.
Okay, so because that demand only takes into account the current supply, or does it take into account, for example, if we could do the trip in 2 hours, for example?
No, it's a demand forecast. It's a demand study taking into account the service that you can offer with the new infrastructure.
Okay.
And it's now, since you bring that up, the demand studies that we have for the Lisbon-Madrid connection, they're from over 10 years ago, when we were planning for a travel time of 2 hours and 45 minutes between Lisbon and Madrid, which we are now not entirely sure if it will be still possible. But it's the data that we have.
Okay. And so now, moving to a more costs and executability of the plan, do you think that so the plan itself didn't mention any cost or any cost projections? Why is this so? Is it because it's just
yeah. So this is supposed to be a network plan. So it's supposed to set down the configuration and the layout of the network, and the purpose is that it will gather as much of a consensus as possible. And this is why we have intentionally left the discussion about priorities and about costs and about investment planning for later. This will be up to future governments to decide which lines are built first and what's the pace of investment that the country is able or willing to make. It's totally analogous to what we have with the National Road Plan.
Okay.
So the National Roads Plan is also a network plan. It only sets out the connections. It doesn't have deadlines or investment priorities or investment estimates. It was approved. The current version was approved in 1985. It has already been altered twice or three times. I don't know exactly, but it has been fairly successful.
Okay.
It now has about 70 or 80% of the main connections built.
Mm-hmm. And was that consensus already achieved?
I would say that the main layout of the network is fairly consensual, and then again the needs and the shortcomings of the rail network in the country, they are fairly well known. Then there is detail here and there, a new proposal here and there that still has a little more discussion to be made. But the broad strokes of the network, I would say they are fairly set down and fairly stable. Then we need to see a few details here and there. If there's a small connection here or another connection there that can be adjusted. Of course, the plan doesn't set an alignment for each line, so it sets the broad network connections, and then further more detailed studies will set exactly where the line will go, exactly where the stations will be. That will be for further studies. What we need to do now is really set down the main layout of the network for the whole country and make it as uncontroversial as possible.
Okay. And is it still in for public consultancy?
No, the public discussion ended on the last day of February, and we received over 600 contributions for the plan, and they are now under analysis. Then to take into the plan what we believe is relevant and what we believe adds to the plan.
Okay. And regarding so you assume that you were going to fund this with the European funds in the...
Well, if it's only up to European funding, then we will take a long time to realize the plan. So the amount of investment that is implied by the plan will for sure need a significant amount of national resources in addition to European funding, because people tend to believe that European funds are infinite, but they're not.
Of course.
But they're not. We are able to fund investment up to 85%, but there is a limited amount of European funding. And so if the country is serious enough and keeps being serious enough about developing its rail network, we will need for the next few decades to invest a significant amount of national resources into this. But this will be, of course, up to future governments and and for the people to vote on those governments and to decide.
Okay. And now a last question about, as you know, this is also sensitive for our international students that are studying at Nova, that we have been living a period with a lot of strikes in CP, Comboios Portugal. Do you think that, and this is also something that makes people not traveling by train, because they, of course, the workers have the right to strike.
Yeah.
But when this is regular, this makes people not avoiding those services.
Yeah.
And what do you think can be done to avoid these disruptions in the supply?
Well, I wouldn't connect the issue of strikes and labor issues with the discussion about the rail network, because they are really separate. Worker struggle is a fact of life that we need to, and it's certainly currently not restricted to the transport sector.
True.
So it's something that we policymakers will have to deal, and it's not only an issue for transport; it's an issue for education, for health, for all public services that people need to trust, and of course the workers need to have their good conditions to work and to provide those services. So that's all I'd like to say about that.
And so, in a sentence, what do you think it's the most important investment at this moment for people to trust more the trains?
Well, trains need to be reliable. They need to be, before they need to be fast and frequent, they need to be reliable. And in that matter, we have, for the past 2 or 3 years, a lot has been achieved. If you compare train cancellations or, well, delays won't be a very good statistic right now because we have a lot of works on the network. So we are not so good with delays right now. But if you go to train cancellations, you see that along the past 2 or 3 years, they have gone down to levels that compare well with other European countries. So this is really the first step before we add speed, we add frequency, and really provide a good service to people. There are a lot of places in Portugal, in the country, but people tend to criticize a lot. But for example, in the suburban lines around Lisbon, we have a service that compares well with any city in Europe you travel to. If you go to the Cascais line, you have during rush hour, you have a train every 12 minutes between Cascais and Lisbon. You have a train every 6 minutes between Oeiras and Lisbon. So it's really a very good service by any measure. Of course, it uses old trains, but we are also working on that.
But does it respond to the demand that exists? Because, for example, I live in...
Well, for now it does.
Okay.
For now it does.
Because, for example, I live in Linha de Sintra, in the Sintra line, where every day the trains are full.
Yeah.
Do you think that is a problem that also should be...
Well, tell me one city in Europe where trains aren't full during rush hour.
Well, I was in Helsinki. Well, I'm comparing with...
Well, I'll put it another way.
Okay.
Given the amount of investment and how expensive rail infrastructure is, the only way for trains not to be full during rush hour is if you have an oversized system.
Okay.
And as economics students, I think you will understand that having a system that has 20, 30, 50% above the capacity it needs to have, it's a waste of resources.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. And for you, I hope you liked it, and stay connected.